So before we get into today's video, because of some confusion I saw in my last What If video covering Thrones, where I talked about what could have happened if Rhaegar actually won the rebellion over Robert, go check that video out if you haven't already. I want everyone to know that while I may reference the books here or there, this What If is centered around the show Canon of Thrones, not the books. The books are pretty different from the show, with plot lines, characters and character arcs the show abandoned, and an ending that has yet to be written, unlike the TV series.
Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
Regardless of how Season 8 in the show ended off though, I doubt it really matters considering what I'm here to do today, which is to basically change the story as a whole. So with that being said, just keep an open mind. This is all being made in good fun, and I will do my best to try and stay as true to the characters as I can while I give my opinion on the things that may change here. Now, one of the biggest issues in the early seasons of Thrones that pretty much affected the entire story as a whole was the succession of Robert Baratheon. The fact that his children, Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella, weren't actually his by blood. They were the children of his wife Cersei and her twin brother, Jaime Lannister. They were pure Lannister children. Or should I say waters, considering that they were bastards born in the Crownlands, without a drop of stag or storm in their blood. But in the show version of Thrones, there was actually a fourth child, and I'm not talking about the one Cersei was pregnant with at the end of the series. Before Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella, Cersei actually had a son with Robert. Cersei talks about him with Catelyn when she's tending to Bran, how he died of a fever and how he was a fighter like Robert.
I lost my first boy, little black-haired beauty. He was a fighter too. Tried to beat the fever that took him.
She even later talks about him with Robert when she asks about Lyanna. Now, this unnamed son of Robert and Cersei does not exist in the books. He's a show original, and this might be the first plot hole we actually get in Thrones. When Cersei was a child, she went to see a woman named Maggie the Frog, who gave her a prophecy about her future, telling her that one day she would marry the king. One day she would be queen, but only for a time before someone younger and more beautiful came and casted her down. She also told her about her children, how many she would have, and that they would die.
Will the king and I have children?
No. The king will have 20 children. And you will have 3.
That doesn't make sense.
Gold will be their crowns. Gold. Their shrouds.
And this is the plot hole I was talking about. If Cersei is only going to have 3 children, then why isn't her son with Robert counted? Sure, he doesn't live long, but he was still born, most likely named, and was alive for a time. He came out of her. She doesn't say that 3 of your kids will live to be X, Y, and Z before they die. She just says Cersei will have 3 of them, and that gold will be their crowns and gold shall be their shrouds. But with this change in the show, the prophecy becomes supposedly wrong, which is a common thing in Thrones. Plenty of people have dreams and misinterpret them. But with that being said, I can't exactly call the prophecy wrong then if it still comes true and the person is the one who made a mistake. But that's besides the point. Maggie's prophecy doesn't leave room for misinterpretation. So how does she just leave out a 4th child? And speaking of misinterpretation and things being left out, there was actually more to Cersei's prophecy that was left out in the show. In the books, Cersei was also told by Maggie how she would die, that the Valancourt would kill her one day. The Valancourt is another word for a younger brother. So, some think that Tyrion will kill Cersei in the books, but others theorize that the person to kill Cersei will actually be Jaime, as despite them being twins, Cersei is actually the oldest out of the 2 of them. She came out first. So the idea of the Kingslayer becoming a Kinslayer, 2 of the most heinous crimes in Westeros being born by one man stacked on top of each other, is an interesting thought, but I am getting off topic. The point of bringing up Cersei's unnamed son with Robert that only exists in the show aside from the plot hole is because I think this is an interesting foundation for an alternate universe to be set upon. More than Robert actually having a trueborn son with Cersei, what if his first son with Cersei in the show, this Black Prince, as he'll have Robert's dark features, lived? How could the story change? For starters, if Robert has a son with Cersei, or rather the boy we hear about in the show lives, he's going to need a name besides Robert and Cersei's son. So I think a pretty fitting name for the Black Prince would be Lionel Baratheon, not to be confused with Lionel Strong from House of the Dragon, as their names are spelled similarly. Aside from the Lord of Harrenhal, Lionel is actually the name of Robert's great-grandfather, who actually rebelled against House Targaryen in a similar fashion to Robert for a similar reason. Lionel Baratheon was alive during the time of Aegon V and Sir Duncan the Tall, also known as Dunk and Egg, who are actually going to be getting their own spin-off show series. Dunk and Egg have also already been cast too, so I'm really looking forward to seeing them in the Blackfires, the cadet branch of House Targaryen that tried and failed for years to take the throne of Westeros, and to see a young, more fleshed out Bloodraven that isn't bound to a tree. Bloodraven in his youth had to be one of the most terrifying men alive, but that's a topic for another video. Lionel Baratheon, who is probably one of my favorite Baratheons, was known as the Laughing Storm in his day because he was infamous for laughing at his opponents while he was beating the crap out of them. He loved to fight like his great-grandson Robert, and when Sir Duncan the Tall was challenged to a trial of 7 by a Targaryen prince named Aerion, one of Aegon V's older brothers, he did not hesitate to sign up and fight with Dunk. A trial by 7, for those who don't know what that is a trial by combat, but instead of a one-on-one duel, it's a 7-on-7. And the one Duncan the Tall and Lionel Baratheon took part in was the first in a century since the reign of Maegor the Cruel, so it was a pretty big deal. When Lionel was Lord of Storm's End and Aegon became king, Lionel's daughter was actually supposed to marry Aegon V's oldest son, Duncan the Small, named after his best friend and now Lord Commander of his Kingsguard, Sir Duncan the Tall. But Egg's son broke off his engagement with the Storm Lord's daughter to marry a common woman named Jenny of Oldstones. And some of you might not know this, but Jenny of Oldstones was actually the person Patrick was singing about in Season 8.
High in the halls of the kings who are gone, Jenny would dance with her ghost.
This insult to his family made Lionel furious, and because his daughter had been slighted this way, he stood in open rebellion against the crown. He declared himself Storm King, and it was only after having a duel with Sir Duncan of the Kingsguard and Aegon swearing to marry his daughter to Lionel's son Ormond that the Storm Lord submitted. Aegon V's daughter, whose name was Rhaella, was the grandmother of Robert, Stannis, and Renly. This is where their claim to the Iron Throne comes from, and the reason Robert was able to claim it legally aside from the right of conquest, which was the real deciding factor, not his blood ties. Regardless, the name Lionel and the history that it holds within the Baratheon family seems like a pretty solid name for the heir apparent. And this is probably our most important change. With the birth of Lionel, this means that Joffrey is not the crown prince. And I do believe that Joffrey and his other siblings will still exist in this timeline. In the show, it is hinted that the death of their first son was one of the dominoes that fell during the marriage of Robert and Cersei that played a role in why it was a failure. Robert was already pretty detached from Cersei as he was still hung up on Lyanna, and the death of a child probably didn't help things much. I believe by their child surviving, their relationship may be a bit better, but not by a lot. There will still be a disconnect between the two of them, and while Cersei might want to try and make it work with Robert, she'd eventually just end up with Jaime again. So Cersei still has bastards, but unlike the canon timeline, the oldest one isn't in line to inherit the Iron Throne first thing. And this brings up another thing we need to address. Jon Arryn. He was the hand to King Robert, and during his time as hand, he did pick up on the knowledge that Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella were not Robert's. Though that wasn't the reason he was killed. Peter and Lysa were the ones who set that up. Peter wanted to become Lord of the Vale and use Lysa to set the Starks leaders against each other, and use the resulting chaos as a mean to obtain more power. So I do feel like Jon Arryn will still be killed, but my main question is, does he still try to pursue the truth of Robert's children? With Lionel being alive and say he's clearly the son of Robert since the seed is strong, would he even care about Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella since they aren't first in line to inherit, and Lionel is the undisputed heir? Lionel being alive could give his half-siblings a bit of legitimacy in my mind, at least because he will be the living evidence that Cersei and Robert were capable of having a child together. And assuming the seed is strong and he looks exactly like Robert with very minimal features from his mother, would it be that hard to assume that maybe the other 3 kids just happen to take after their mom instead of just being incest babies? It could be plausible. Or maybe it would be the exact opposite. Because Lionel looks so much like his dad and the other 3 do not, this could cause Jon Arryn to go on a search for Robert's bastards to compare and contrast, so he can learn the truth. Because like Allison says in Hot D,
to have 1 child like that is a mistake. To have 3 is an insult.
But what Lord Arryn thinks won't really matter because he'll just die anyway, and we'll transition to the first episode of When the King Rides North in Thrones. I think things will go the same for the most part, but with the addition of Lionel Baratheon, the king's first trueborn son. With Lionel surviving, he'll be the heir to the throne after Robert, as he'll be older than Joffrey. We'll say he's about Robb's age at the start of the show. Now, Lionel as a character is a blank slate, as he never existed in the first place. You could put any kind of personality on him and still get an interesting story. All we really know from Cersei is that he was a fighter like Robert, but you could still say, despite not being born of incest, he actually ends up being worse than Joffrey for whatever reason. But for this what if, my image of Lionel is that he's kinda like a young Robert in a way, with differences here and there. He's a fighter, he's confident, maybe a little arrogant at times, but not cruel like Joffrey is, and is otherwise kind of a cool guy. He makes questionable decisions, but he's not a one-to-one copy of his dad or his mom. He doesn't get drunk or sleep around like his dad does. I imagine that part will be the same about Robert no matter if his son survives, and perhaps seeing his parents' terrible relationship makes Lionel want to be better than Robert. I think Lionel would idolize Robert and who he used to be in the past. The man, the myth, the legend, the demon of the trident that was Bobby B, and that's who he kind of aspires to be. So I could imagine Lionel going after Ned and asking him all kinds of questions about his adventures with Robert to learn more about his dad when he was young, and make that connection with the Lord of Winterfell, especially since they're going to be family now. Robert will still make his offer to Ned to be Hand of the King and unite their houses in marriage. So this time around, Sansa is going to marry Lionel and not Joffrey, which is a much better match since he's not going to go out of his way to hurt her like his brother did in canon. From here, I believe things will go the same. Bran is still going to fall after seeing Jaime and Cersei, Jon still goes to the Night's Watch, and Ned goes south with Robert. Something interesting I could see changing with Lionel being in the picture is what happens to Micah, the butcher's boy, and Arya's direwolf, Nymeria. In the canon timeline, Joffrey was with Sansa and they went on a walk and found Arya and Micah. Joffrey went out of his way to torture Micah because he could, and Arya attacked him, which caused Joffrey to try and kill her, which caused Nymeria to bite Joffrey. Because this happened, Micah was killed for attacking the prince, which he didn't do because Sansa lied about it. And because Nymeria was sent away by Arya and they couldn't find her, Sansa's direwolf lady was killed instead so the Lannisters could have their pound of flesh, while Nymeria went and made a wolf pack of her own. This won't happen now. With Lionel being around, say he goes on a walk with Sansa like he did with Joffrey. If he finds Arya and Micah, he probably won't attack them like Joffrey did. In my mind, I think he'd actually give them pointers instead of punishments and entertain the idea of training them a little bit. This may make Sansa a bit jealous because young Sansa is really obsessed with the idea of being a princess and may not like the idea that Lionel, her prince, is spending time with her sister. But more importantly than that, if a fight never breaks out by the river and no one gets maimed, then both Nymeria and Lady get to make the trip to King's Landing with their Stark children. So both Stark girls get to keep their direwolves. And this is where things could get really interesting in the story. I imagine a lot stays the same for a bit, like Peter setting up the Starks and Lannisters against one another. Bran will still have an assassin sent after him. Peter will blame Tyrion with the dagger when Cat shows up, and Tyrion will be taken prisoner by her. So we still get Bronn on the story, Jaime still attacks Ned, and Tyrion will later escape through a trial by combat with Bronn as his champion. But the real intriguing part of all of this would come from Ned. In canon, like his predecessor Jon Arryn, Ned found out that the Queen's children were bastards after doing some research. Knowing none of Cersei's children were blood related to Robert made things pretty cut and dry for Ned. They had no right or claim to the Iron Throne, so they needed to be removed. But things get tricky with Lionel being around now. If Ned finds out the truth about Tommen, Joffrey, and Myrcella, Cersei still has at least one legitimate child with Robert, so it won't be as easy for him to try and oust the Lannisters. I mean, it wasn't easy before, as he failed and got killed, but it's even worse now. Knowing Ned as a character and how honorable he is, even with a trueborn son of Robert around, I don't see him being okay with Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella being in the line of succession. Even if Lionel is the oldest, people still die all the time. Ned's brother Brandon died, killed by the Mad King before he could marry and sire heirs of his own. That's the only reason Ned is Lord of Winterfell. Who's to say the same thing can't happen to the king's oldest son? Now, I don't see Cersei killing Lionel so Joffrey can take the throne if that's what anyone's thinking out there. Despite how terrible she is, Cersei loves her children. It is one of her only redeeming qualities.
You love your children. It's your one redeeming quality, that and your cheekbones.
And no matter how she may feel about Robert, Lionel will be her son too, and her only irrefutable claim to power, a way to potentially stave off rumors of her other children. If it's possible for one child to look completely like his father, who's to say the other three can't just look like their mother? But as I mentioned earlier in the video, having one child looking so different from the others could also be cause for suspicion and concern. But it may not matter if it can't be proved, and proving it will be Ned's biggest issue. In this timeline, I imagine Robert will still die, and one difference I see happening is Ned is not named as Protector of the Realm in place of his heir. If we assume that Lionel is around the age of Robb in the show, then he doesn't need anyone to be his regent. He can step into place as king immediately. And this is where things get interesting again. In canon, knowing that none of the Baratheon children were actually Baratheon children, Ned planned to imprison Cersei and the kids before handing the throne to Stannis. But with Lionel being around, being the rightful heir, I don't see Ned having an issue with his ascension. This is Robert's blood son, after all. The tricky part I just mentioned is Cersei's other children. Would he just allow them to stay in line for the succession? As Lionel has yet to marry Sansa and produce heirs of his own, Joffrey, by law, being recognized as Robert's son, even though he isn't, would be the heir to Lionel when it should be Stannis. Could Ned openly accuse Cersei of adultery if Lionel is on the throne as the undisputed heir? Will the king even believe that his mother was unfaithful and that his siblings are actually bastards? Would he even care? These are things Ned would have to think about now. But knowing Ned, I could still see him trying something. It may not be as brazen as trying to imprison Cersei and her children, as there won't be a bastard sitting on the Iron Throne who needs to be immediately removed. But perhaps it'll be something as simple as telling Lionel the truth, like he planned to do with Robert.
When the king returns from his hunt, I'll tell him the truth. You must be gone by then.
Ned is a very blunt and to-the-point guy, so I see him just straight up telling Lionel as perfectly within the bounds of his character. So I feel when Lionel takes the throne, Ned will have no problem swearing fealty to him, but he would ask for an audience with the king, perhaps in private. Now, I could see a possible obstacle for Ned being Cersei. She'll know that Ned knows, and there will be the question of will she try and stop him from telling Lionel the truth, or let him tell her son and cling to the fact that she is his mother as a way to sway his thoughts and decisions like she tried to do with Joffrey. There are a few ways I could see things going, but in this timeline, let's say that Lionel gives Ned a private audience. He's pretty much a man now who can make his own decisions. He's not impatient like Joffrey, and Ned is his father's friend, so he decides to hear what he has to say. Ned tells him the truth, that Cersei was unfaithful and that his siblings are bastards. This could be a very interesting plot point if we're being honest. Lionel may not want to believe that his siblings are his half-siblings, but not only that, incest babies. It's very difficult for Lionel in this moment because unlike his dad, regardless of who the father is, Lionel still has a blood connection to his other siblings no matter what. So he may or may not believe what Ned says. Or, what could be interesting is if he does believe Ned, but chooses to do nothing about it because he loves his family, and potentially because he knows the implications that could be in store for him if he puts his siblings out there. If he says his siblings are bastards, wants to stop rumors from spreading about him too. If the queen can sire 3, who's to say there isn't a 4th? Everyone says Lionel looks like Robert, but is he truly Robert? And this could be an interesting addition to the character, knowing the truth but claiming otherwise, showcasing his differences from his father. No matter how much he looks like him or may have idolized him, he is a different man. There is a lion within the stag. With him being king, the truth is what he will make it. And maybe he'll even reason that it doesn't matter what his siblings are. Unless someone is planning to kill him tomorrow, once he and Sansa are wed and have children of their own, his siblings will be pushed down in the line of succession anyway. Now, I could see Ned not liking this and resigning as Hand. Lionel will try to make him reconsider and stay. He helped his father take the throne. Why not stay and help him keep it? Their families are going to be one soon enough. But once again, I don't see Ned accepting this. He's too noble and wouldn't want to be a part of this lie, even if what Lionel says is true. So I say he'll just take Arya, Nymeria, and his bannermen, who won't be dead because he didn't try to arrest the queen, and leave. He may want to take Sansa back too, but maybe Lionel will convince him to let her stay. The wolf and the stag were meant to rule together. He wants to at least join the families as they would have been had Lyanna actually married Robert. He would ask at least for this one thing. If not for him, then for the promise made years ago to Robert that went unfulfilled. We'll say Ned agrees because, liar or not, Lionel is not Joffrey. He isn't cruel for no reason or a bastard. He makes questionable decisions that Ned doesn't agree with, like Robert, but also like Robert, he can see that he's not evil. And maybe he trusts that and allows Sansa to stay, though this will mean she is a political hostage. Either way, Ned gets to live and he and Arya get to go back to Winterfell. Maybe they travel with Yoren since they're all going the same direction, which is north. This pretty much alters Arya's timeline as she won't become a prisoner and meet Tywin. She won't meet the Brotherhood or go across the sea to Braavos. Cersei, I believe, will be okay with the Starks leaving because she was in canon. As long as Ned bent the knee and acknowledged Joffrey as king, she would have let him go back to Winterfell.
Bend the knee, my lord. Bend the knee and swear loyalty to my son. And we shall allow you to live out your days in the grey waste you call home.
I believe it'll be the same here, but a potential problem I could see, if not Cersei, is Littlefinger. He wants the Starks and Lannisters to fight each other, so he may or may not try to have Ned and Arya killed on the way back to Winterfell to stoke the fires. Some other things I could see changing is the killing of Robert's bastards. In the show, Joffrey does this to eliminate any potential threats to his reign. If he was a pure Lannister bastard, then he would have no claim to the Iron Throne. And a bastard of Robert, while they would fall behind Stannis and Renly as they would be illegitimate, they would still come over Joffrey. Lionel would have little to no questions that he is Robert's son, and unlike his brother in the show, wouldn't go so far as to kill his competition. So baby Bera gets to live and Gendry isn't being hunted, and if he's not being hunted, then the convoy that's going to the Night's Watch will not be attacked, so Yoren most likely gets to live too. Now if this was the book canon, this would be different, as in the books, Cersei was the one who wanted the bastards of Robert dead, not Joffrey. But as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, we're going off the show, and show Cersei probably doesn't care. Some other things I could see changing is the dismissal of Barristan Selmy from the Kingsguard. With Lionel as king instead of Joffrey, I don't see him dismissing Barristan from his service. He has a certain respect for warriors, especially the distinguished ones. Joffrey dismissed Selmy because he was too old and let Robert die. But him letting Barristan go is stupid. After Sir Arthur Dayne and even Jaime Lannister, Barristan Selmy is probably the greatest knight in the Seven Kingdoms. I mean, this is the guy who ended the War of the Nine Penny Kings when he killed Meleys the Monstrous. This is the guy who scaled the walls of Duskendale by himself to save King Aerys when he was less mad and had been captured by House Darkland. He did it in one day, alone, saving the king and with an arrow in his chest. It's a shame what they did to this guy in the show. Lionel would respect this guy too much to let him go. So Barristan the Bold gets to stay in Westeros, and this could change Daenerys' timeline since he won't go to Essos to find her. She may actually get killed by that scorpion because he's not trailing behind her to save her. Instead of Barristan being released, in light of the rumors, or shall I say truth that's been revealed, I could see Lionel releasing Jaime from the Kingsguard instead. Maybe as a way to keep his Lannister family at a distance and prevent more rumors from spreading. Or maybe he'll send Cersei back to Casterly Rock or something, instead of sending Jaime away. That way she won't be able to just go and visit him. But aside from that possibility, another thing I could see changing with Robert's son being around is the War of the Five Kings. If Lionel is alive, the trueborn son of Robert, then I find it unlikely that Stannis will rise against him. He may still have Melisandre in his ear trying to talk him into it, but Stannis is a man of duty before prophecy. In canon, the two just happen to correlate with one another. But here, I believe he'd be bound by duty and blood to serve Lionel. He comes before him, he has to follow, and he is king by blood right. So he has a duty to follow the crown. Something interesting I could see happening is that with Ned resigning, Lionel will need a new hand. Perhaps he'll name Stannis. That could be interesting. It would definitely remove Stannis as competition unless he tries to expose Cersei's other kids. Speaking of competition, there is still Renly. Now, Renly seems to not care about the order of succession. I mean, he did in the beginning until Loras came along and put that battery in his back.
But I'd fight for you. I'm fourth in line. And where's Robert in the line of royal succession? Joffrey is a monster, Tommen is 8.
Stannis
has the personality of a lobster.
After that conversation with Loras, Renly doesn't care about the succession. He believes the throne should go to the one who is most fit for it, and in his eyes, that's him. Even if Lionel is a trueborn Baratheon, say he reminds Renly too much of Robert. Not that he's an incompetent drunk, but that he's a warrior king. Renly may not support him. After all, he does say this to Ned.
She's a good soldier. Everyone knows that. So was Robert. Tell me something. Do you still believe good soldiers make good kings?
So this may be enough for Renly to go against his nephew. So the War of Five Kings may just be a war of storms. The Baratheons of King's Landing, with the Lannisters and maybe even the Starks through Sansa, could fight the Baratheons of Storm's End with the help of the Tyrells. It's shaping up to be a very different timeline. For example, something I should have mentioned earlier is the changes that happened with the Starks too. If Ned is never imprisoned in King's Landing, then Robb never calls the Banners to back him and get him back. He never fights the Lannisters, never captures Jaime and kills Lord Karstark. Robb won't be king in the North, especially if Ned manages to make it back to Winterfell alive. There won't be a Red Wedding, and the Greyjoys may not rebel. They won't see their opening to strike the Starks, as their forces won't be spread in the South. Theon may stay loyal if Ned is around and they aren't going to war, so he'll probably be spared quality time with Ramsay. Another change I could see is Jaime. If he never gets captured by the Starks, chances are he doesn't go on that road trip with Brienne, and he gets to keep his right hand, so he stays in prime condition. I also doubt that Renly will be killed by a shadow baby this time around, since Stannis probably won't be entertaining Melisandre. But something interesting to think about is if Melisandre can't get to Stannis, what if she goes after Lionel? She sees things in her fires, things that are real, but she misinterprets them. It's not hard to believe that she may have a vision about Lionel somewhere down the line, think he's the Lord's chosen, since Stannis didn't pan out, and try to get in with him for the sake of prophecy. Or maybe she'll go looking for Jon Snow. Either way, a lot could happen if Robert actually had a trueborn son with Cersei. This video may seem like a glorified fanfic or something, but you always risk that with what ifs like this. After all, at a certain point, they do become pretty much choose your own adventures kind of things. These are just some of my thoughts though, and this video is getting too long. So for now, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you thought in the comments, and I will see you all next time.